Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Hello, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is an extra edition of the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, along with Bill Flowers, who joins me every week. We got some Egg Bowl stuff to talk about. I think we're probably going to talk a little bit maybe about the Jackson Dart gate that happened last week. But I do want to, before we get started and once we get into it, Bill, what is your favorite Egg Bowl memory?
Favorite Egg Bowl memory was my freshman year, my true freshman year. My family came over from Birmingham. We had Thanksgiving. My brother, he came over. He had just finished up, I want to say, his senior year at UTC. And he came over to Oxford, and he jumped in a RV full of Canadians, and didn't get back to my dorm room until like 6 a.m. in the morning. He experienced Oxford at its finest, with a bunch of Canadians in an RV, I got to see the brawl before the game. You know, that was my first moments of the Egg Bowl, of watching that, the animosity and just the hatred between the players. Even though I didn't get to play, I was in the stands. I was enjoying it. So that was my favorite. Least favorite had to be the rain. The cold, rainy in 2003 at Starkville. My dad had been there before, and he's deaf in one ear, and he said, "Son, I can't ever go back to Starkville with those bells." So my dad was one and done in a Starkville moment, but he wasn't there in 2003. I don't blame him. That was some pretty nasty moments. We also, I would say, the 2002, when it was cold, wet, it was in Oxford, and we weren't going to go to a bowl game, and it was just like that was a pretty miserable moment as well. But I would definitely say the 2003 in the wet, raining environment was pretty nasty.
What, was your true freshman year the Deuce to Romero pass?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that was kind of a fun game. That was definitely a fun game, because either the year before was the weird kick game, to where a pass got intercepted on like a Romero Miller tipped pass or something. I don't know. There's been some weird stuff that has happened in this football game. They're expecting temperatures Thursday night to be in the 40s. I think it's going to be relatively dry because the weather's going through right now. So this game, Mississippi State has two really good players. Now, they have some other playmakers, but they have two really good players, and that is Jet Johnson and Nathaniel Watson, the two middle linebackers. They like to get after the quarterback. They do some games with them. There's some talent there. How does Ole Miss neutralize those linebackers when you know they're the problem? That's what you've got to get past.
Well, I would love to see us do a play action, your RPO, hit the tight ends over the middle. Very much what Sanders does naturally, which for some reason we can't get Dart to do, that we won't do, very often. You do that a few times, and you get those linebackers to come in, and you put a tight end over the back of them. You're gonna neutralize those linebackers real quick. That's exactly how you do it. You neutralize them by that. You can't guess. If you want to guess, go for it. I'll pop you with a tight end. I'll pop you with a quick drive route or win route with our inside receivers. It's not extremely difficult how to do that. You've got the ability to do it. You got the talent to do it. So that's how you neutralize it.
In a game like this, like I said, you went down to Starkville a couple of times and played in the game. How do you handle that environment? Because I haven't been for a similar reason to what your dad said. I'm actually deaf in one ear as well. So I don't go to rock concerts. I don't do anything to where my hearing can be affected because
Right.
I'm a one and done situation.
Yeah.
Um, but how do you handle that environment? Because it does sound like bees buzzing whenever you go into that
It,
stadium.
it doesn't really affect you the way that, players like to be in hostile environments. We like to play in environments where there's a lot of energy. To me, me growing up in Alabama, I didn't know anything about the Egg Bowl. So, I knew everything about the Iron Bowl. Whereas these players, most of the players on this team, they grew up with a hatred for state and vice versa. So, it's that naturally they're going to have that energy. It's the other players that don't know the history, don't know much about it. There's not a lot to play for here. Really the only thing you're playing for is pride. And obviously for Ole Miss, you're playing for a better bowl game. So it's sort of like last week. You're trying to keep them, listen, this is what we're playing for. You know, uh, you're playing for pride. You're playing for dignity. You're playing for bragging rights. There's a lot to play for that you're playing for, but it's not like you're playing for something major. And when you have a young team, which I would say they are, it's just, hey, Mississippi State is playing for everything. They have one goal in mind, and that is to beat you. Ole Miss is sort of like, it's like that dog that's chewing on your leg, just kick it. And that's the reality, is that you might not think that there's a lot to play for, or you're not playing LSU, you're playing the worst team in the SEC essentially. That worst team in the SEC can beat you, especially if you're not focused. And I think that's what they've really got to get a handle on.
Okay, I got a question for 12-year-old Bill, because adult Bill is all Ole Miss. I know he's Mr. Ole Miss, all of that.
Yeah.
But now I got a question for 12-year-old Bill. In the
Yeah.
Iron Bowl, which side did you go?
So 12-year-old Bill lived in Miami, Florida in 93. So I grew up as a huge FSU fan.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, huge FSU fan. I cried the first wide right game. I can tell you where I was. My dad, great role model, had me in the highlight and dog racing tracks that game. And so I don't know if anybody knows what highlight is, but if you don't, Google it.
Yeah,
And
it's nuts.
so we were betting on dogs and betting on highlight, and I cried. I was a huge FSU fan. I was a Seminole in Pop Warner football, Coral Gables Youth Center. So I grew up with that. So when I went on my official visit to FSU, I was like, this is pretty cool. Growing up a huge FSU fan. So again, me going to, in '93, after Hurricane Andrew blew our house down in Miami, moved to Birmingham. I got inundated, with the Iron Bowl, and realized like I had no understanding of what this Iron Bowl was about. Like I thought when Miami played Alabama, that Alabama was this like hick team that was going to get their butt kicked. Like I literally did not know anything about it. I mean, I grew up, going to Miami Dolphins games, and I went to a couple, Hurricane games, but I had nothing about Alabama, Auburn. So, it was sort of one of those things people ask, like, how did you pick Ole Miss? It's like, well, one, I wasn't brainwashed between Auburn and Alabama, so I had much more of an easy way of making decisions. So.
Now that you mentioned that, though, I have one question. You might not know the answer to this, and you might not have been involved in this at all. But how close was Frank Gore and Roscoe Parrish to coming to Ole Miss?
I heard it was very close, and I'm sure there was a lot of cash involved. I'm sure there was. It's not the NIL days, so I would be shocked if there was something not heavily involved, because I was hearing that they were locked deal, but didn't happen. So
yeah, so something went down, but I've always been curious about that one. Whenever you brought up Miami and growing up down there, that's immediately where my mind went. Anyway, thank you very much, Bill, for joining us, and thank you so much for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every single day. Bill, thank you so much for joining the show, and we'll talk to you again next week, bud.
yes, sir. Thank you.